The wind cut through Maya's jacket like it wasn't even there. She pulled it tighter around herself, but it didn't help. Nothing helped against a Detroit winter when you couldn't afford a proper coat. The bus stop bench was covered in ice, so she stood, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep the blood moving in her toes. Her shoes had a hole in the left sole, and she'd stuffed it with cardboard that morning. Now the cardboard was wet and cold against her skin. It was 11 o'clock at night and the street was mostly empty. A few cars passed, their headlights briefly lighting up the falling snow before disappearing into the darkness. Maya checked her phone. The battery was at 8%. She couldn't afford to let it die because she needed it for her alarm in the morning. 5:30 came early, and she had to be at her first job by 6:15. She'd just left her third job interview that week. This one had seemed promising. The manager had smiled, asked good questions, nodded at her answers. But then came the part Maya dreaded. "We'll call you if something opens up," the woman had said, and Maya knew what that meant. It meant no. It always meant no. Maya was 32 years old, and she felt like she'd been tired for most of them. She had 2 kids waiting at home, Jaden and Naya, 6 and 9 years old. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was watching them, same as she did most nights, but the old woman couldn't keep doing this forever. She'd already told Maya she might need to cut back on the babysitting because her arthritis was getting worse. The thought of finding someone else to watch the kids made Maya's stomach hurt. Childcare cost money she didn't have. She worked 2 jobs already, sometimes 3 when she could pick up extra shifts. The fast food job paid minimum wage. The cleaning job paid a little more, but the hours were irregular. Nothing was ever enough. Rent was due in 3 days, and she had $8.47 in her bank account. $8.47. She'd counted it 3 times on her phone's banking app, hoping somehow the numbers would change. They never did. Maya thought about her kids sleeping in their small bedroom, sharing a mattress on the floor because she'd had to sell their bed frames last year to pay the electric bill. She thought about how Jaden had asked for new shoes last week because his were too small and hurt his feet. She'd told him to wait just a little longer, maybe next month, but she'd been saying that for 3 months now. The guilt was always there, sitting heavy in her chest. She was their mother. She was supposed to provide for them, protect them, give them a good life. Instead, she was giving them everything she had, and it still wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. A gust of wind blew a piece of paper across the sidewalk. It caught against her leg and she bent down to pull it free. It was a flyer, wet and partially torn. In the dim light from the street lamp, she could make out the words, "Free Community Coding Workshop. No experience needed. Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Learn skills that can change your life." Maya stared at it for a long moment. Coding. She didn't know anything about computers beyond using her phone and the basic register system at work. She'd dropped out of high school when she got pregnant with Nia at 17. College had never been an option, not for someone like her. Skills that could change your life. The words felt both like a promise and a mockery. She almost threw the flyer away. What was the point? She barely had time to breathe, let alone sit in some workshop all day Saturday. That was her only day to catch up on laundry, clean the apartment, spend actual time with her kids instead of just putting them to bed exhausted every night. Besides, she didn't have a computer. She didn't have transportation money to get anywhere extra. She didn't have childcare for weekend classes. But something made her fold the flyer and put it in her pocket, instead of tossing it in the trash can next to the bench. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the cold making her delirious. Or maybe somewhere deep down there was still a tiny spark of hope that refused to go out completely, no matter how hard life tried to extinguish it. The bus finally came, 20 minutes late. Maya climbed on, grateful for the warmth even though it smelled like stale French fries and somebody's wet dog. She found a seat near the back and leaned her head against the cold window. The flyer crinkled in her pocket. She thought about that woman at the interview tonight with her neat suit and professional smile. That woman probably had a college degree, a nice apartment, money in her savings account. She probably went home to a house where the heat worked properly, and the refrigerator was full, and nobody lay awake at night wondering how they'd pay next month's rent. Maya wondered what her life might have looked like if she'd made different choices, if she'd stayed in school, if she hadn't gotten pregnant so young, if she'd had parents who could help, instead of parents who'd kicked her out when she needed them most. But thinking like that never helped anything. You couldn't change the past. You could only keep moving forward one exhausted step at a time. The bus jerked and swayed through the dark streets. Maya watched the city pass by outside her window. Closed storefronts, empty parking lots, occasional clusters of people huddled outside gas stations. This was her world, had been for years. Working, struggling, barely surviving. She'd almost forgotten there could be anything else. When she finally got home at midnight, Mrs. Patterson was asleep on the couch, the television playing softly. Maya gently shook her awake and thanked her, apologizing for being so late. The old woman waved off the apology and shuffled home to her own apartment next door. Maya checked on the kids. They were curled up together under the 2 thin blankets she'd gotten from the thrift store. Nia had her arm around Jaden, protecting him even in sleep. Maya's heart ached looking at them. They deserved so much more than this. She went to the kitchen and made herself a cup of instant coffee with the last of the hot water from the kettle. The apartment was cold. She kept the heat low to save money. She'd learned to sleep in sweatpants and 2 sweatshirts. The kids had the better blankets. She wouldn't have it any other way. Sitting at the small kitchen table, Maya pulled out the flyer again. Free community coding workshop. The address was for a community center about 2 miles away. She could walk it if she had to. The workshop was 4 hours every Saturday for 3 months. What would she do with the kids? Could she bring them? Would they even let her? She thought about calling Mrs. Patterson, but she couldn't ask the woman for more favors. She'd already asked too much. She thought about just forgetting the whole thing, crumpling up the flyer and throwing it away like she should have done at the bus stop. But then she thought about that number in her bank account, $8.47. She thought about Jaden's 2 small shoes and Nia's worn-out backpack, and the constant grinding exhaustion of working so hard and still falling further behind. She thought about job interviews that went nowhere and the look in her kids' eyes when she had to tell them no. Not this time, maybe later. Wait just a little longer. Something had to change. She couldn't keep living like this. Her kids couldn't keep living like this. Maya didn't know anything about coding or computers or technology. She didn't know if she was even smart enough to learn. She'd barely passed the classes she did take in high school before dropping out. But maybe that didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was trying. Maybe what mattered was making a decision. Any decision that pointed toward something different than the life she was living now. The coffee had gone cold in her cup. It was almost 1 in the morning. She had to be up in 4.5 hours. Maya looked at the flyer one more time, then carefully tucked it into her purse. Tomorrow she'd call the community center and ask about the workshop. She'd figure out the childcare situation somehow. She'd find a way. Because standing at that bus stop in the freezing cold, broke and exhausted and running out of options, she'd made a choice. She'd picked up that flyer instead of walking past it, and now she was going to see where that choice led. It was terrifying and probably foolish and almost certainly impossible, but it was something, and right now something was all she had. The community center smelled like old basketballs and bleach. Maya stood in the doorway Saturday morning, her kids beside her, feeling completely out of place. Through the open door of a classroom, she could see people setting up laptops on long tables. Real laptops, expensive-looking ones. She didn't belong here. "Mama, I'm hungry," Jaden whispered, tugging on her hand. She'd given them cereal that morning, but it hadn't been much. There was never quite enough food lately. "I know, baby. Just a little while, okay?" She had 2 granola bars in her purse, the cheap kind from the dollar store. She'd save those for later if the kids got too restless. A woman with kind eyes and gray hair approached them. "Are you here for the coding workshop?" Maya nodded, suddenly feeling like maybe this was a mistake. "I called earlier in the week. They said it was okay if I brought my kids. I don't have anyone to watch them, and I thought maybe they could just sit quietly, and I'm sorry if this won't work. I can leave." "Hey, slow down." The woman smiled. "It's absolutely fine. We have a kids' area set up in the corner with books and coloring supplies. Some other parents bring their children too. I'm Linda, one of the volunteers here." She led them into the classroom. There were about 15 people already there. All ages, all different. A few other parents had kids with them. Maya felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Maybe this wouldn't be so impossible after all. Linda got Nia and Jaden settled with coloring books and crayons at a small table in the back. Then she brought Maya to one of the long tables and opened up a laptop. "This one's yours for the duration of the course. We have a lending program. You can even take it home if you need to practice." Maya stared at the computer. Take it home? She'd never owned anything this valuable in her life. I couldn't. What if something happens to it? That's what insurance is for. Linda patted her shoulder. You're here to learn. Can't learn without the tools. The instructor arrived a few minutes later. His name was Marcus, and he was a tall black man with graying temples and an easy smile. He introduced himself and told them his story. 10 years ago, he'd been homeless, living in his car after leaving the military with PTSD and no job prospects. Someone had given him a chance to learn coding at a program like this one. Now he worked as a software developer and spent his weekends teaching others. Maya listened, barely breathing. Someone who'd had nothing, just like her, and had found a way out. It seemed impossible, but here he was standing in front of them, living proof. I'm not going to lie to you, Marcus said, looking around the room. This is going to be hard. Some of you will want to quit. Some of you will think you're not smart enough. But I'm here to tell you that anyone can learn this. It's not about being a genius. It's about being stubborn enough to keep trying when things get confusing. Can you do that? Maya thought about all the times she'd worked double shifts on 3 hours of sleep. All the times she'd figured out how to stretch $5 into meals for 3 people. All the nights she'd laid awake doing math in her head, trying to figure out which bill to pay first, which one could wait, how to rob Peter to pay Paul and somehow keep her family fed and housed. She could be stubborn. She'd been stubborn her whole life. It was the only reason she was still standing. That first day was overwhelming. Marcus taught them basic concepts, showed them how to write simple commands that made things happen on the screen. Maya's head spun trying to keep up. Everyone else seemed to understand faster than she did. Her fingers fumbled on the keyboard. She'd never learned to type properly, just the hunt and peck method she used on her phone. During the break, she almost packed up and left. This was stupid. She was stupid for thinking she could do this. She didn't have a high school diploma. She didn't understand half of what Marcus was saying. The younger people in the class were picking things up so much faster. You're doing fine. Marcus appeared beside her table. I saw you were stuck on that last exercise. I'm not getting it. I'm not. Maya shook her head. This was a mistake. I should go. Why? Because you didn't understand something the first time you tried it. Marcus pulled up a chair. Let me tell you something. When I started learning this, I spent 3 hours trying to figure out why my code wouldn't work. You know what the problem was? I forgot a semicolon. One tiny punctuation mark. I felt like the biggest idiot in the world. Maya looked at him. But you figured it out, eventually. With help. That's the secret nobody tells you. Everybody struggles. Everybody gets stuck. The only difference between people who make it and people who don't is that the ones who make it ask for help and keep trying. That's it. That's the whole secret. He showed her where she'd gone wrong, explained it in a different way. This time it clicked. Maya felt a small surge of excitement when her code finally worked. When the computer did exactly what she'd told it to do. It was a tiny thing, just making some text appear on the screen. But she'd made it happen. She'd told the computer what to do, and it had listened. By the end of the 4 hours, Maya's brain hurt, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite hope, not yet. But maybe the possibility of hope. Like seeing a light far away in the dark and not knowing if you can reach it, but knowing at least that it's there. She took the laptop home, carrying it carefully like it was made of glass. That night after she put the kids to bed, she opened it up at the kitchen table. Her hands shook a little as she tried to remember what Marcus had taught them. She pulled up the practice exercises he'd given them to try during the week. It took her 2 hours to finish what should have taken 20 minutes. She made mistake after mistake, had to backtrack, start over, search online for answers to questions she barely knew how to ask. But she finished. At 2 a.m, running on coffee and determination, she finished the exercises. The next week she went back. And the week after that, she started staying up after her shifts at work, teaching herself from free tutorials she found online. Her eyes burned from staring at the screen. Her back ached from hunching over the laptop. She was exhausted all the time, running on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, drinking too much coffee, living on crackers and peanut butter because she was too tired to make real food. But she kept going. Mrs. Patterson started watching the kids for a few hours some evenings, so Maya could focus. The old woman wouldn't take payment. Just teach me how to video call my grandkids, she said. That'll be payment enough. So Maya did, and Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears when she saw her grandson's face on the screen for the first time in months. Maya's family thought she was wasting her time. Her sister called and told her to get her head out of the clouds and focus on finding a better-paying job in the real world. Her mother said she was neglecting her children to chase a fantasy. Even the guy at the corner store who'd known Maya for years shook his head when she told him what she was doing. That tech stuff? That's not for people like us, people like us. Maya heard that phrase everywhere. It meant poor people. It meant people without degrees or connections or money. It meant people who were supposed to stay in their lane and be grateful for whatever scraps they could get. But Maya kept thinking about Marcus, living in his car, and then learning to code, and now teaching others. She kept thinking about that moment when her code had finally worked. That feeling of making something happen through her own effort and brain power. She kept thinking about her kids and the life she wanted to give them, the life they deserved. 3 months passed. The workshop ended. Marcus pulled Maya aside on the last day. "You've got something," he said. "Raw talent, sure, but more than that. You've got grit. You keep showing up even when it's hard. That matters more than being naturally gifted." He told her about apprenticeship programs, entry-level positions, companies that hired people without traditional backgrounds. Most of it sounded impossible. She didn't have a portfolio of projects. She didn't have references from tech companies. She didn't even have a high school diploma. But Marcus also told her this. Build something, anything, something that solves a real problem for real people. That's your portfolio. That's how you show what you can do. Maya went home that night and thought about problems. She had plenty of those. Bills she couldn't pay, food she couldn't afford, a car that broke down last month that she still couldn't fix, childcare she couldn't find, jobs that didn't pay enough no matter how many hours she worked. Money. It all came back to money. Not having enough of it, not knowing where it went, trying to stretch it further than it could possibly stretch. She started building an app, a simple one for people like her, a way to track every dollar, see where it was going, figure out which bills absolutely had to be paid first, calculate how many shifts you'd need to work to afford something. Budget trackers existed already, but they were designed for people who had money to budget. Maya wanted to build something for people who were just trying to survive, who needed to know if they could afford to buy their kid a new pair of shoes this month, or if that would mean choosing between electricity and food. She worked on it late at night. She worked on it on her breaks at her jobs. She taught herself things Marcus hadn't covered in the workshop. Searching online, reading documentation, joining forums where she was too intimidated to post questions, but read everyone else's discussions and learned from them. The code didn't always work. She broke things constantly. Sometimes she spent hours hunting for a single error. But slowly, piece by piece, the app started to come together. It wasn't pretty. It probably wasn't built the right way, but it worked. And more than that, it was useful. It was something she wished she'd had years ago. Marcus had told her to email him when she finished something. 2 months after the workshop ended at 3 in the morning, Maya sent him the app. Then she went to bed, not expecting anything to come of it. He called her the next day during her lunch break. "This is good," he said. "Really good. You understand the problem because you've lived it. I know a startup looking for an apprentice. Junior level, nothing fancy, but it's paid, and they might be willing to take someone without a traditional background if I vouch for them. Can you send me your resume?" Maya almost laughed. "Resume? I don't really have one. I mean, I have work experience, but it's all retail and food service and cleaning. Nothing impressive. Send me what you have. Include this app. Include a link where they can test it. Tell them your story, not the sad parts, the learning parts, what you've taught yourself, what you want to do. Can you do that?" "I think so." "Good. Do it today. I'll give them a call tomorrow." Maya sat in her car in the fast food restaurant parking lot, hands shaking, and updated her resume on her phone. Then she did something she would never have had the courage to do 6 months ago. She wrote a cover letter. She told them she was self-taught, that she'd learned to code because she needed to change her life, that she'd built the app because she understood what it was like to struggle with money. She told them she was a hard worker, a fast learner, and she wouldn't let them down if they gave her a chance. Then she pressed send before she could second-guess herself. The interview was on a Tuesday afternoon. Maya had to leave work early, which meant losing those hours of pay. But this was worth the risk. She'd never been inside an office building like this before. Glass doors, modern furniture in the lobby, people walking around in casual but expensive-looking clothes, everyone seeming to know exactly where they belonged. She'd worn her best outfit, the one she saved for job interviews. Black pants from Goodwill, a button-up shirt she'd ironed carefully that morning. Next to everyone else, she still felt underdressed and out of place. The company was small, just 12 people. They made apps for nonprofits and community organizations. The founder, a woman named Rachel in her early 40s, sat across from Maya in a small conference room with large windows overlooking the city. "Marcus speaks highly of you," Rachel said, looking through papers that Maya recognized as her resume and the documentation she'd sent about her app. "Tell me about this project. What made you decide to build it?" Maya's hands were sweating. She'd practiced what she wanted to say, but now that she was here, the words felt stuck in her throat. This woman probably had multiple degrees, years of experience. What could Maya possibly say that would impress her? But then she thought about standing at that bus stop in the cold, and she thought about Marcus living in his car. And she thought about all the other people who'd been told they weren't good enough, that opportunities weren't for people like them. "I built it because I needed it," Maya said. "I've been poor my whole adult life. I have 2 kids and I work multiple jobs, and no matter how hard I try, there's never enough money. All the budget apps out there, they're designed for people who have money to manage. I wanted something for people like me, people who are just trying to figure out which bill they can pay this month without getting disconnected, or whether they can afford to take their kid to the doctor." Rachel nodded, listening. "Show me how it works." Maya pulled out the borrowed laptop and walked her through the app. It was basic, rough around the edges, but it functioned. You could input your income, your bills, mark which ones were urgent and which could potentially wait. It calculated how many hours you'd need to work to afford something. It suggested which bills to prioritize based on consequences. It even had a feature that celebrated small victories, because Maya knew how important it was to acknowledge when you managed to get through another month, another week, another day. "This is good," Rachel said when Maya finished. "The code needs work. You've got some efficiency issues here and here." She pointed at the screen. "But the concept is solid. More than that, it's personal. It solves a real problem. That's what good software does." Maya felt hope starting to bloom in her chest, fragile and terrifying. "The apprenticeship position is entry-level," Rachel continued. $15 an hour to start, 40 hours a week. Health insurance after 3 months. Your job would be to learn mainly. We'd pair you with one of our senior developers. You'd work on real projects, but with supervision and support. It's designed for people transitioning into tech. Does that interest you? $15 an hour, 40 hours a week. Maya did the math in her head automatically, the way she always did. That was $2,400 a month before taxes, more than she made at all her current jobs combined. And health insurance. She'd been without insurance since Jaden was born. "Yes," Maya said. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, that interests me very much. I'm not going to lie to you, Maya, you're going to be behind. The other people here, they have computer science degrees or years of experience. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to feel overwhelmed. Are you ready for that?" Maya thought about staying up until 3 in the morning learning to code after working 2 jobs. She thought about building an entire app from scratch with no one to help her, just online tutorials and stubborn determination. She thought about every hard thing she'd already done in her life just to survive. "I'm ready," she said. Rachel smiled. "Okay then. Let's give it a shot. When can you start?" The first month was terrifying. Maya had to quit her other jobs, which meant relying completely on this one source of income. If she messed up, if they fired her, she'd have nothing. She couldn't afford to fail. They paired her with a developer named James, a quiet guy in his late 20s who was patient and thorough. He'd explain things multiple times if she didn't understand. He'd sit with her while she debugged code, teaching her how to problem solve, how to read error messages, how to break big problems into smaller pieces. But Maya still felt like she was drowning. Everyone around her spoke in jargon she didn't fully understand. They referenced concepts and tools she'd never heard of. In meetings, people would say things and everyone else would nod, but Maya would be lost. too afraid to ask what they meant and reveal how little she knew. She made mistakes, simple ones that the others wouldn't have made. She'd spend hours trying to figure something out that someone with a proper education would have known instinctively. She'd misunderstand instructions and have to redo work. She felt stupid constantly. "I don't belong here," she told James one day, close to tears after spending 3 hours stuck on a problem that he'd solved in 10 minutes when she finally asked for help. "You know what I see when I look at your work?" James said. "Someone who doesn't give up. You could have asked me for help 3 hours ago, but you kept trying to figure it out yourself. That's good. That shows you want to learn. But Maya, it's also okay to ask for help. That's how everyone learns. You think I knew all this stuff when I started? I had a degree and I still felt lost most of the time." "You had a degree," Maya said. "I didn't even finish high school." "So? You taught yourself to code in 6 months and built a functioning app. Do you know how many people with degrees couldn't do that? You've got something most people don't have. You've got real-world problem-solving skills from years of making impossible situations work. That's valuable." Slowly, very slowly, things started to click. The jargon became familiar. The concepts made sense. Maya learned to ask questions instead of suffering in silence. She learned that everyone got stuck sometimes. Everyone made mistakes. The difference was that here, people helped each other. It wasn't like her old jobs where you were on your own and if you couldn't keep up, too bad. 3 months in, Rachel called Maya into her office. Maya's heart pounded. This was it. They were going to tell her it wasn't working out, that she needed too much help, that they'd made a mistake. "I wanted to talk to you about your trajectory here," Rachel said. Maya's stomach dropped. Trajectory? That sounded like a nice way of saying they were letting her go. "We're really happy with your progress," Rachel continued. "James says you're one of the hardest workers he's ever mentored. You've picked up the fundamentals faster than we expected. We'd like to offer you a junior developer position. $55,000 a year, full benefits." Maya stared at her. "I don't understand." "You're doing well, Maya. Really well. The apprenticeship was only supposed to last 6 months before we evaluated. But we don't need to wait. You're ready. $55,000. Maya had never even imagined making that much money. It didn't seem real. It seemed like the kind of number that existed for other people, not for girls who got pregnant in high school and lived paycheck to paycheck their entire adult lives. "Are you sure?" Maya's voice shook. "You're sure you don't want to wait and see if—" "I'm sure. Do you want the position?" "Yes. God, yes. Thank you. I won't let you down. I promise I'll—" Rachel held up a hand, smiling. "Maya, breathe. You've already proven yourself. That's why we're offering this. Just keep doing what you're doing." That night, Maya took her kids out for dinner. Not fast food in her car between shifts. A real restaurant with a real waiter and a real menu. Nothing fancy, just a local pizza place, but it felt like the most extravagant thing in the world. She let Jaden and Nia order whatever they wanted. She didn't look at the prices. She didn't calculate in her head whether they could afford it. When the bill came, she paid it without that familiar clench of anxiety in her stomach. She even left a good tip, because she remembered what it was like working for tips, hoping people would be generous. "Mama, why are you crying?" Nia asked. Maya wiped her eyes, laughing a little. "I'm just happy, baby, that's all. I'm just really, really happy." She thought about that night at the bus stop, cold and broke and defeated. She thought about the flyer that had changed everything. One decision, one choice to pick up that paper instead of walking past it. One choice to believe that maybe, possibly, things could be different. She'd been so scared. She'd almost given up 100 times. But she hadn't. She'd kept going, kept learning, kept showing up even when it was hard. And here she was, on the other side of impossible, sitting in a restaurant with her kids, knowing that tomorrow she didn't have to wake up at 5:30 for a job she hated. Knowing that next month she could pay all her bills and still have money left over. Knowing that Jaden could get new shoes and Nia could get school supplies and they could finally start to build something better. It wasn't perfect. She still had debt to pay off. She still had years of catching up to do. But for the first time in her adult life, Maya could see a future that looked different than her past. She could see possibility. She could see hope. And that was everything. Maya's first real paycheck was a moment she knew she'd remember forever. She'd been paid before, of course, hundreds of times. But those had always been small amounts from her hourly jobs. Money that disappeared the moment it arrived, swallowed up by rent and bills and the endless effort to just survive. This was different. She sat in her car in the parking lot, staring at the direct deposit notification on her phone. After taxes, it was more money than she'd ever had in her bank account at one time. More than she'd made in 2 months at her old jobs. She cried right there in the driver's seat. Not sad tears, but overwhelmed ones. The kind that come when something you barely allowed yourself to hope for becomes real. The first thing she did was buy Jaden new shoes. Good ones from an actual store, in the right size. She bought Naya a backpack that didn't have holes in it and a new winter coat. She went to the grocery store and bought fresh vegetables and chicken and milk and cereal, filling the cart without constantly calculating the total in her head. At checkout, when the cashier told her the amount, Maya handed over her debit card without that familiar spike of panic that there might not be enough to cover it. She paid her rent on time for the first time in months. She called the electric company and paid off the past due balance. She sent money to Mrs. Patterson even though the old woman protested, because she'd done so much and never asked for anything in return. But even with all of that, there was still money left over. Maya opened a savings account, something she'd never had before, and put $200 into it. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a cushion, a safety net, a tiny barrier between her family and the edge of disaster. The changes weren't just financial. Maya moved her family to a better apartment, still modest but in a safer neighborhood with a good school district. The kids each got their own bedroom for the first time in their lives. She bought furniture that wasn't from thrift stores or garbage picked off the curb. She took Jaden to the dentist for a cavity he'd been complaining about for months. She took Nia to get glasses because her teacher said she was squinting at the board. She could breathe. That was the biggest change. For the first time in years, Maya could take a full breath without the constant weight of anxiety pressing on her chest. But work was still hard in different ways. Maya was the least experienced person at the company by far. The others had computer science degrees from good universities or years of experience at other tech companies or both. They could do in an hour what took Maya all day. They spoke fluently in the technical language that Maya was still learning word by word. She felt the imposter syndrome constantly. That voice in her head that said she didn't deserve to be here, that she'd gotten lucky, that eventually someone would realize she wasn't actually good enough and send her back to where she came from. James, her mentor, tried to reassure her. You're being too hard on yourself. Nobody expects you to be at their level yet. You've been doing this for less than a year. Some of us have been coding for a decade. But I'm so slow, Maya said, frustrated after spending an entire day on a feature that should have been simple. I hold everyone up. You're thorough, James corrected. You think through problems. You consider edge cases. Those are good things. Speed comes with time. Rachel pulled Maya aside one day after a team meeting where Maya had sat silent, too intimidated to share her ideas. I noticed you didn't speak up when we were discussing the nonprofit client's needs. Maya felt her face heat with embarrassment. I didn't think I had anything useful to say. Everyone else has so much more experience. You have something none of them have, Rachel said. You've lived the life of the people we're building for. That nonprofit serves low-income families. You understand their challenges in a way we don't. Your perspective is valuable, Maya. Don't hide it. The next meeting, Maya forced herself to speak up. They were designing an app for a food bank, and the team was discussing how to structure the appointment system. Everyone was focused on efficiency, on streamlining the process, on making it clean and simple. Maya's hand shook a little as she unmuted herself on the video call. Can I suggest something? Everyone looked at her. She almost backed down, almost said never mind. But she thought about standing in line at food banks herself, about the shame and anxiety of it, about what would have made it easier. I think we should add a feature where people can check from home whether the food bank has items they need before they make the trip. When you're poor and don't have a car, getting to the food bank is expensive and time-consuming. Bus fare, time off work, arranging childcare. If you get there and they're out of diapers or formula or whatever you desperately need, you've wasted all that effort. If people could check availability from their phones first, it would help them plan better. There was a pause. Maya's heart pounded. She'd said too much, revealed too much about her past, her experience with poverty. Then James nodded. That's brilliant. I wouldn't have thought of that. Rachel smiled. That's exactly the kind of insight I'm talking about. Let's add it to the spec. After that meeting, Maya felt something shift inside her. Maybe she did belong here. Maybe her lack of formal education wasn't just a deficit. Maybe the years she'd spent struggling and surviving had taught her something valuable that couldn't be learned in a classroom. She started contributing more in meetings. When they were building apps for community organizations, for nonprofits serving vulnerable populations, Maya spoke up about the real-world challenges their users would face. She pushed back against designs that assumed everyone had reliable internet, or the latest phone, or the ability to easily travel across the city. She advocated for simplicity, for clarity, for features that addressed actual needs rather than looking impressive. Her coworkers started coming to her for input. What do you think someone would need here? How would this work for someone without stable housing? What if they have limited English? What if they're not tech-savvy? Maya had answers to these questions because she'd lived them, or known people who had. Her perspective made their products better, more accessible, more useful for the people who needed them most. 6 months into her new position, Maya was given her own project to lead. A small one, nothing complex, but it was hers. She'd be responsible for designing and building a resource directory app for a homeless services organization. She'd work with the client, gather requirements, plan the features, write the code. She was terrified. Leading a project meant people were depending on her. What if she messed up? What if she couldn't do it? But she thought about everything she'd already done. Learning to code from nothing. Building an app that actually worked. Going from sleeping on a floor to having a career. A real career with benefits and a salary and the opportunity to grow. If she could do all that, she could do this too. Maya met with the client, a tired but passionate woman who ran the homeless services organization. They talked for 2 hours about what the organization needed, what their clients struggled with, how technology could help. Maya took notes, asked questions, understood the problem in her bones because she'd been close enough to homelessness herself to know what it felt like. She designed the app with care, thinking about every detail. Large, clear buttons for people with shaky hands or vision problems. Offline functionality because homeless people often didn't have consistent internet access. Simple language, no jargon, nothing complicated. A map feature showing where services were located, when they were open, what they provided. A favorites list for resources people used regularly. A section for emergency services that was always easy to access. She built it piece by piece, testing it constantly, getting feedback from the client and from actual homeless individuals. James helped when she got stuck, but mostly she figured things out herself. She learned to trust her instincts, to believe in her ability to solve problems. 3 months later, she presented the finished app to the organization. The director cried when she saw it, telling Maya it was exactly what they needed, that this would help so many people. That night, Maya went home and looked at her kids sleeping in their own rooms in their safe apartment, and she thought about how far they'd come. 1 year ago, she'd been standing at a bus stop in the cold, broke and exhausted and hopeless. Now she was a software developer working on projects that made a difference. She had savings in the bank. Her kids had everything they needed. She was building a future instead of just surviving the present. It didn't seem real sometimes. She'd wake up and be surprised all over again that this was her life now. That she'd done this, accomplished this, become this person she barely recognized, but it was real. It was hard-earned and real and hers. And she wasn't done yet. She was still learning, still growing, still pushing herself. But now she knew something she hadn't known before. She was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. She belonged in spaces she'd thought were closed to people like her. She could change her life with determination and help, and one brave decision made in a moment of desperation. And if she could do it, maybe others could too. The idea came to Maya on a cold February evening almost exactly 2 years after that night at the bus stop. She was walking to her car after work, and she saw a woman huddled in a doorway, layers of clothes wrapped around her against the cold. For a moment, Maya saw herself. That could have been her. Should have been her by all rights. The odds had been so stacked against her. But one thing had changed everything. One opportunity, one person who believed in her. One program that didn't require a degree or money or connections, just willingness to learn. That night, Maya couldn't stop thinking about it. How many other people were out there like she'd been? Smart, capable, hardworking, but trapped in poverty with no clear path out. How many of them could learn to code if someone just gave them a chance? How many of them had perspectives and insights that the tech world desperately needed, but never accessed because the barriers to entry were too high? She started researching. She looked at existing coding programs and saw that most required daytime attendance or substantial fees or prerequisites she'd never had. The free programs were rare and often had long waiting lists. There wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Maya thought about what had worked for her. The free workshop on weekends, the borrowed laptop, the childcare corner, the instructor who'd lived through poverty himself and understood. The focus on practical skills rather than theory. The support system that didn't judge or assume everyone had the same advantages. What if she could create that for others? The idea was overwhelming. She didn't have experience running a nonprofit. She didn't have funding or connections or any idea how to make something like this happen. But then again, 2 years ago, she hadn't had experience in tech either, and she'd figured that out. She started small. She talked to Marcus first, told him her idea. He loved it immediately. "I'll help," he said. "I've been wanting to expand what we're doing anyway. Let's do it together." They met with Rachel, who surprised Maya by offering to help with the business side. "I've been thinking about how to give back," Rachel said. "This is it. This is exactly what the tech industry needs. Let me help you get it off the ground." Maya started working on code from the cold in the evenings and on weekends, the same way she'd learned to code in the first place. Late nights at her kitchen table fueled by coffee and purpose. She wrote a mission statement. She created a curriculum based on what had worked for her, what she wished she'd had. She reached out to community centers about using their space. She talked to tech companies about donating old laptops that still worked fine, but weren't the latest model. The response stunned her. People wanted to help. Companies donated equipment. Developers volunteered to teach. Community centers offered space. A local foundation gave them a small grant. It was like everyone had been waiting for something like this, for a way to make tech more accessible to people who'd been shut out. 6 months after the idea first sparked, they held their first workshop. Maya stood in front of 12 people, all adults who were struggling financially, who worked multiple jobs or were currently homeless or were single parents barely scraping by. She saw herself in every one of them. "My name is Maya," she said. 2 years ago, I was working at a fast food restaurant and cleaning offices and living paycheck to paycheck with my 2 kids. I didn't have a high school diploma. I didn't know anything about computers. I definitely didn't think I could learn to code. But I did. And if I could do it, you can too. She told them her story. Not just the success parts, but the hard parts. The nights she'd wanted to give up. The times she'd felt stupid and overwhelmed. The constant fear that she wasn't good enough. She wanted them to know that everyone struggles. That difficulty doesn't mean you're not cut out for this. That progress happens slowly, and that's okay. Over the next 3 months, Maya watched those 12 people transform. Some of them dropped out, unable to balance everything or deciding it wasn't for them. That was okay. Not everyone had to be a coder. But 8 of them stuck with it, showed up every weekend, practiced during the week, helped each other through the hard parts. By the end, 3 of them had landed paying internships. 2 more had gotten entry-level tech support jobs, using their new skills as a foot in the door. 1 was working on building her own app. 2 were continuing to learn, not quite ready for jobs yet, but progressing steadily. Maya couldn't stop smiling. 8 people whose lives were potentially on a different trajectory now because someone had given them a chance. They ran another cohort. And another. Word spread. More volunteers signed up. More companies wanted to partner with them. The local news did a story about Maya and the program. More people applied than they had space for. A year after starting Code from the Cold, Maya hired their first full-time coordinator. 2 years after that, they had programs running in 3 different cities. They'd helped over 200 people start their coding journeys, and 47 of them had landed jobs in tech or tech-adjacent fields. Maya still worked as a developer, but she'd gone part-time at Rachel's company to focus more on the nonprofit. She spoke at local schools, at homeless shelters, at community centers. She told her story over and over, not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted people to understand that change was possible. That tech wasn't just for people with degrees and money and the right background. One evening, She got an email from a woman named Tasha, who'd been in their second cohort. Tasha had been living in a shelter when she started the program. Now she was writing to tell Maya she'd just gotten her first developer job, that she was moving into an apartment with her daughter, that everything had changed. "You saved my life," Tasha wrote. "I don't know where I'd be if not for this program. Thank you for believing in people like us." Maya read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was it. This was what mattered. Not just her own success, but creating pathways for others. Taking everything she'd learned, all the help she'd received, and passing it forward. Her kids were doing well. Jaden was in middle school now, talking about maybe wanting to make video games someday. Nia was in high school, getting good grades, applying for scholarships for college. Maya had savings in the bank, a reliable car, a job she loved, a home that felt safe and stable. But more than any of that, she had purpose. She'd found it in the most unlikely way on the coldest night in her darkest moment. One decision to pick up a flyer instead of letting it blow away. One decision to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Standing at that same bus stop one evening, on her way to teach a workshop, Maya thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago. Broke, exhausted, desperate, out of options. If she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, she wouldn't believe it. The transformation was too big, too impossible. But that was the thing about transformation. It always seemed impossible until it wasn't. It always seemed like something that happened to other people, in other circumstances, with other advantages. Until one day you made a choice, and then another choice, and then another. Until one day you looked up and realized you'd become someone different. Someone you'd never imagined you could be. Maya wasn't special. She'd never been special. She'd just been stubborn and desperate enough to try when trying seemed pointless. She'd been lucky enough to find help when she needed it. And she'd been brave enough to keep going when giving up would have been so much easier. Now she spent her life trying to be that help for others. That person who believed in them when they didn't believe in themselves. That opportunity that seemed to come out of nowhere but actually came from someone who remembered what it was like to need an opportunity. The bus pulled up, but Maya didn't get on. She stood there for a moment longer, watching the city lights flicker on as evening fell. Somewhere out there were people like she'd been, people who thought opportunities weren't for them, people who'd been told to stay in their lane, that some things just weren't for people like them. She hoped they'd find their flyer, their moment, their chance. She hoped they'd be brave enough to take it, and she'd keep doing everything she could to make sure those chances existed, to lower the barriers, to prove that the only thing separating people from possibilities was access and opportunity, and someone willing to believe in their potential.